Hey guys, and welcome back. So we're going to continue on now with the Spock build, and I'm going to start my portion of the video here with the Spock figure before moving on to the snakes. Now, just a brief recap. As you know, I was going to be making Spock into the mirror universe. And if you recall from the last video, I was going to use this head sculpt that I got off of eBay, which already came with a beard, for my figure. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a tad bit small, and I decided to ultimately order the same figurehead that Mark is using, and that's what you see here from CultTVMan.com. So obviously this is a replacement for the original Spock head, so it's not going to come with a beard, and the goal then was to create a beard sculpt for this face. So what I did was to use epoxy sculpt putty. Now I did have some footage to show you here. Unfortunately, I accidentally erased it as I was doing some editing here, but it wasn't too difficult to do, although it took a little bit of patience. At first, I wasn't sure how this was going to turn out, but with some patience, I was able to mold and shape it into the beard that you see here. So now that that is done, we have to move on to the uniform. So as you know, the uniform is different that they wear in the mirror universe. And I took the time to watch the episode again and captured some screenshots from it. And let me show you the figurehead again. If you notice that the figure comes with a collar piece around the base of the neck, which is supposed to be representative of that black collar piece of the conventional uniforms. At first, I thought I would have to cover that with epoxy sculpt, but actually, I'm glad that it's there. What I did was I scribed an extra line along the base of the neck there that is representative of that collar piece that Spock wears, and there's an overlap there. So here's a screenshot that I got from the episode. So that collar piece actually will be helpful. We just have to paint that black in the long run. But what I'm going to do then is use epoxy sculpt to build around the lower collar, if you will, around that neck piece. So we're going to go ahead and get started now. And what's going to prove helpful are these tools that I got from Michaels. I used these, as you recall, in the last video for creating the terrain pieces around the base. And I also actually ended up using these for the beard as well.
Okay, so as you can see, Spock's head now is attached to his upper torso, and you can see some epoxy sculpt around his neck. The reason that is there is because I've already attempted to try to create this open collar that we're after. Again, this is what the uniform looks like, where it's this open tunic. It joins at the front with one side overlapping the other. Now, I tried at first just to lay down some epoxy sculpt around his neck and create that collar. A couple things happened. The first thing, I had to start over because the first thing was I didn't mix the epoxy sculpt quite right, so it wasn't hardening properly. And secondly, it was looking a little messy, and so when I was trying to sand it, it actually just started falling apart because the mixture wasn't quite right, so I have to start over anyway. So I was thinking about this, and what I created now are just some templates that hopefully will help me create what I need to with the epoxy sculpt. So we have two templates here with an opening size to fit around his neck, and the idea is to lay this over some epoxy sculpt, create the opening that we need, take one side, we'll do the right side first, place it onto the figure, and then we'll place the opposite side because that one overlaps the other. And hopefully that'll give us this open tunic that we're looking for here. Alright, so this is how we're looking. Very pleased with the results here. I left this sit about 6 hours. I had a bunch of stuff that I needed to do, so I came back and everything is nice and dry and pretty solid. So what we have to do now is work on the sash. This is the gold sash that is around Spock's waist. And what I plan to do is go ahead and put his bottom half together here after I work on some of the seams. And the sash will go about right here. That's why I didn't do too much work on the bottom part of this shirt. Alright, so I have the upper and lower half now glued together. As you can see, I've also designed and created some medals for his chest. I use this reference picture that you see here from the TV show. And to create the medals, they're just made of very thin styrene and just cut and snip some pieces there to shape them. And I think they turned out pretty well. So next is to form the sash, and I'm going to use epoxy sculpt, of course, for that as well. It's going to go around his waist and down his side. So I cut a piece of paper here just to act as a guide, and so it'll go about right here and be about this width here. And then, so we're going to construct the waist first, and then we'll move on to the one that drapes down. So I've got some wax paper here, which has made it easy to work with our epoxy sculpt putty. It won't stick to this. So we're going to go ahead and shape this to the proper length, and then we'll apply it to his waist. Alright, well the figure now is assembled, and I have his face masked off with liquid mask. I thought that would be easier versus using masking tape, and I'm also leaving his hands off till the end as well. That'd be one less area to mask. Alright, let's talk about painting our figure, and what I want to do is take a second just to show you this book called Star Trek Costumes. For under 30 bucks you can get this book, and it has all kinds of pictures of all the costumes that were designed for the TV shows as well as the movies. And it goes all the way up to Into Darkness. So they do have a section for the original series, obviously, and what we're looking at here is a picture of the costumes worn for the Mirror Universe. Now, it's always kind of a dilemma on what to paint your model, because usually there's a difference between what the subject appears like in person versus what you see on screen. Especially after they've remastered a lot of the footage from the original series, the costumes look very vibrant on screen versus what we're seeing here. This is a picture of the original costume, and no doubt it's color corrected, so the color is a little bit more subdued. So I actually was going to go with this as my guide, and as you can see here, I'm applying a light blue, and that is Vallejo's Azure Blue. However, when all was done, it really was looking kind of bland. So I'm going to go ahead and punch up the colors, and the mixture I'm going to be using now is this light sea blue as the main color mixed in with azure blue. It's going to be about a it's going to be a 70-30 mixture, and then I'm going to mix in, actually, because I've experimented with this already, just a shade of this magic blue, so probably just a few drops of this. And yeah, that'll be the base color. For the highlights, since that color is going to be a little bit darker than the light sea blue, I'm going to use this actually for our highlights, and probably mix in a little bit of this deep sky blue. And then for the shadows, I'm going to mix in some grays, just to darken it up a bit more. All right, let's go ahead and get started with painting the figure. So after applying the base color, I moved on to applying the shadows, then the highlights, which you see here. Next was the application of the gold trim, and I decided to do this with a toothpick. One thing I found helpful was to add a couple drops of retarder medium to slow the drying down, and this helped out with the application and spreading of the paint. Once the trim was done, it was time to move on to the trousers, and for this I used dark gray for the base color. This was a mix of Vallejo's neutral gray with black. I mixed in more black for the shadows and the creases. Then I lightened the base color with some light gray and carefully applied the highlights with my Renegade airbrush. Next I painted the sash. However, I decided to use Vallejo's brass as a base color, then brushing on some gold afterwards. I felt that gold on its own would have been too bright. Alright, it's now time to move on to the face, and in the interest of time I did not record a lot of this because it is the same method that I've used with other figures that I've painted in my past videos. So what I start off with is an abbreviated version of what I learned from painter Darren Carnell. He's a figure painter, and I would call him master figure painter, based in England. And if you want to learn anything about figure painting and face painting in particular, he's a guy to watch. So you can check out his channel. He's got a lot of information about that stuff, and he's got a Patreon channel as well. Now, this method is for lighter skin tones, obviously, and rather than describing everything in detail here, I've created a summary for you guys. So if you're interested in getting a hold of that, just email me at interstellarmodeler@gmail.com, and I'll get that over to you. And I'd advise, of course, using this as a starting point. You can vary the shades and the colors a little bit based on the figure that you're painting, because skin tones can obviously vary quite a bit. But if you've not done much with face painting, I think this is a good way to get started, and that way you can add a little more realism to the faces of your figures. So once face was completed, it was now time to move on to his beard and hair, and I started out with a black-brown from Vallejo. As you can see in this picture, his beard was not black like we're used to seeing his hair, rather it was brown in color. Once that was dried, I added some highlights. The same black-brown was used for the base for his hair, except I brushed in some black to darken it. And to help with the application of the black, I did use this glaze medium by Vallejo, and it functions to both slow down the drying time and also to make the color you're applying a little more transparent, and this helps with the blending process. Alright, and there he is completed. I'm sorry I couldn't tape really painting the eyes. It was just too detailed of work. I didn't want to goof up. But what I did was I used ivory for the white part, or the sclera, and then I started off with the black-brown to create the irises, and then I, over that, used Terra Earth just for a lighter brown, and then dotted the pupil. It can be very difficult to see this on a video camera, but it's all there. And then I glossed it over with just some gloss medium here, and yeah, I think it turned out pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up the hands, and then we're pretty much done with Spock. So the snakes are made of two pieces, and because they're two halves, you create a seam that stretches along the entire length of the piece. And the pieces are contoured here, so it is difficult to try to get putty to eliminate the seam along here. So I'm going to use two techniques here. One is to use Tamiya putty for this seam along the spine, and then I'm going to use plastic weld for the seam along the inside here. And to sand this area, I'm going to use this tool here, which is made for contoured surfaces. I've already used it on this piece here, and it worked pretty well. So it did get rid of the seam. Unfortunately, you are going to end up losing some of the detailing here. I'm really just not sure there's much you can do about that. You can try to scribe that in. I just don't think it's going to look right. So I'm just going to leave it as is. Now, my snakes are going to be painted black along this entire length, so hopefully that won't be too noticeable that we're losing some of that detailing. Okay, well, I'm done with what I would call phase one of this assembly here. That was just addressing all the seams on the heads of the snakes and seams along the mouths. Now, this one here, as they go along here, the mouths get smaller, so this one you can't really see the seam too much along the roof and the floor of the mouth, plus the tongue will be in there covering most of that. So I just addressed and joined the areas here so that when you look at it, you won't see a seam right there. The second one opens up a little more. So again, I just applied putty as I showed you there with that pointed Q-tip there, and then this is the largest one, which you have to definitely make sure that you have those covered there. So the next challenge will be now assembling this and addressing those seams, because there's going to be a seam now along the base of each neck, so I'm going to take care of those one by one as we go along here. Alright, so this is how it's looking here, and I was debating whether or not to paint all of this before gluing the piece together, but because of the way the seams were, I decided to push ahead with assembling everything and then painting. It's proving to be a challenge, of course, because of the angles that we have to work with here. But what I did was apply a white primer to the underside here first. I was trying to paint yellow over the gray, but it really wasn't looking right, so the white made the yellow stand out much better. So what I think I'm going to try is, rather than airbrushing the rest of this, I'm going to try and hand paint it with some craft paint that I purchased of this light green color. And so we'll proceed with that now and see how it turns out. well, we're getting close to completion here, and I'm sorry I didn't record a lot of this. Most of this, really all of this, was pretty much hand painted, with the exception of the yellow and the feathering I did along the edge here. But the rest of it was just too difficult to try to get it in camera and to do a good job. So it was just hand painted, coat after coat of the green, and then the mouths were kind of challenging to paint because of the teeth that get in the way, and then the mouths get smaller and smaller as you go along here. So I still have a little bit of cleanup to do along the edges to kind of clean up the lines here around the teeth. But yeah, it's coming along pretty well. You can see our picture in the background now, just trying to match those colors. And what I have left to do now, the biggest part now, is to paint the black along the spines. So we're in the home stretch here with the snake, and it's now time to apply the last detail here, which is the black along the spine. Now if you look closely at the pattern here on the box art, you see that it has these pointed edges all along. And so what I've done to create that pattern is to just hand tear some masking tape in this way. You don't want to use scissors because it'll look too regular. And I just laid it down all along the length of the spine here. And it comes to a point here at the top of his head. Now to apply the black paint, I'm not going to use a paintbrush. I'm going to use a piece of a sponge here, just because I think a brush would look too even. We want a more mottled sort of appearance, I think. So we're going to go ahead and give this a shot here, and hopefully it'll work out. Let's see what happens. Okay, well, let's go ahead and peel away the tape here and see how it looks. Let's see, let me just grab another pair of tweezers here. And just kind of... Alright, well, it's looking pretty good here. I'm very happy with the way it turned out. I may modify the edges a little bit with a brush, maybe add a little more speckles here along the edge, but overall I think it's pretty much what I was after there. So let's go ahead and move on to the other heads now. Alright, so this is how the snake turned out. I'm very pleased with the results here. I did take my brush to add in just a few more of these pointed areas here, so I think it worked out really well. And one of the details is this little Enterprise that Mark Fraley gave me. If you recall, he kept it from his K7 station model, and I think it works pretty nice here with our little diorama. And then the other thing was to add this little knife to Spock's belt. I almost forgot that detail there.
Alright, well that's pretty much a wrap for me. I've been having a lot of fun with this project. So glad that we chose this for our buddy build. I've always wanted to build this model, and it's come along really well, I think. So what I have left to do is to attach the figures now to the base, and then I'm completed. I look forward to showing you that completed project. However, of course, we have to wait to see what Mark has been doing. Now, typically what I've done is I've edited his footage and my footage together, just like I did in the first part, but just based on the way our schedules worked out, it's just worked out better for me to make one video showing all of my progress, and I promise the next video will get you caught up with what Mark has done, and I think you'll be impressed. He did move forward with that phaser effect, and it actually looks really cool. So we look forward to showing you the completed projects together. That will either happen at the end of the next video, just depending on the length of his footage. We may stretch that into one final video showing you the final reveal, but we will show you the projects together. So thanks again for watching. If you have any questions in regards at least to what I've done, feel free to contact me here on my YouTube channel or at interstellarmodeler@gmail.com. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next part. Take care.